Hi everyone, my name is Emily, and in this step, we are going to be doing the two cats program. We're going to be continuing that from the previous steps. Today I have a special guest,
Oh, hi,
Nika.
everybody.
So say hi to Nika, and she's going to be helping us finish this code. And so let's get started. I'm going to pivot over to the Chrome tab because it shows us what we have to do. The first thing is always to run git pull, just so that you get any commits that you might have made before, so you don't get any merge conflicts, because those are always tricky to resolve. Next, we're going to do some modifications to our Azure function to output two generated cat pictures from the cat API and two random names from the list below. So we're working with some JavaScript, but we're also just building off of the serverless concepts that we learned before. This is more of like a coding technical thing rather than a learning concepts kind of step.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, like returning a single item is pretty
Mhm.
straightforward, but then normally we don't do that, right? We return a more complex object that has metadata or has other stuff around it. So this is a good practice for that.
Exactly. And just like Nika said, if you look at this body that we're returning from the serverless function, it is going to be an object, and it has three things in it. It has two base64 pieces of data, and then the third one is going to be the array, which is the names. So I'm going to go back down here, and this step is pretty short. So let's get to it. The first thing we're going to do is create a names array with the names that we had before.
Mhm.
What you can do, I would actually recommend you create a separate function for generating random names. I'm going to copy this list right here, go back to VS Code, and right here we have this is the code we had before for just calling the cat API and getting an image and returning base64. What I'm going to do, just to make everything nice and clean, is to create a function, and I'm going to call it getCatPic. What I'm going to do next is just shove all this code inside this function, because that's what the function is doing. It's going to return the data, which is the base64 data.
Yeah,
Um,
it makes sense to put in a function since we're going to call it at least twice. So,
exactly.
right, we don't want to repeat ourselves. And don't
Mhm.
get too hung up on try. People watching at home, like, don't get too much on, oh, I can never ever repeat a line of code, but this is like 8 lines of code, right? We definitely want to call this as a function.
Exactly. Like imagine just copy pasting this twice. It might
Mhm.
might seem okay right now, but once you get to longer and more complex projects, it's going to be really confusing trying to go through all of that. Um, all right. I just copy pasted that, so I'm gonna have to copy this again. Let's create a second function. And this function, which we're also going to call twice, is going to get our random names. So get names. Yeah, go
Not
ahead.
me to be too math nerd, but I do just want to ask a question about what you think the expectations are. We have these 5 names, I think, or 6 names for this
Mhm.
array. Go ahead and paste it in so I can look at it.
Yeah, yeah, of
But
course. Let me comment
does
after.
it meet the requirements if it returns Shreya, an array with Shreya as the two members
That
of
is
the
a
array?
good question. It actually does. It does
Okay,
meet the requirements.
thumbs up,
Yeah.
thumbs up.
Yeah. I like that you pointed that out though, because Nika just pointed out a potential bug. Let's say you wanted two different names and you didn't want to call the same person twice. You didn't want two cats named Shreya. In
Mhm.
that case, this code would not be right. You would have to make some alterations, make some edits to fix that logic error. But in this case, we're going simple. We just need a way to pick out two random names, so without replacement. Right.
Yeah,
So
if you're
now,
super into math and mathematics, you'll know that like saying, "Hey, do this randomly" is actually something that like it's like, "Hey, that's actually not enough information. I don't know what you meant." Like random number 2, 1, and 5. What is that? Like, do you want 3 to be the most common number that I return, or do you want it to be, Anyway, that's just a silly thing. But yeah, in this case, it's a classic example. It can come up in professional life. Is like, what are the exact requirements? Usually,
mhm,
it's better to just make something. Say, "Hey, does that meet it?" And then hear back if that's not quite right.
mhm. Yeah, that's a great point of thing to point out, because when you're out there writing documentation and things like that for the things you code, you can't be vague because people won't know how to use their code. And yeah, it makes it harder for the user as well. I'm going to go ahead and create a array for this, an array. What you want to do is you can just paste the list in here we had for you in the curriculum, and then you're just going to have to go ahead and go in there and add a bunch of quotations. I'm sure there's probably some website out there that probably automates this for you, considering how tedious it can be if you have an extremely long list. But there we go, we got that. And let's go ahead and go to the next step. So now that we have our names, we're going to generate random values. The way we can do that is if you go in here, we have some syntax for you. Now, if you don't really understand the syntax, that's totally fine. I would recommend you Google and learn about the functions that you use in JavaScript to get a random number. Nika, do you have anything to comment on that?
I'll say, like, this is a perfectly elegant way to do it. It is one of these things where there's about 100 ways to get a random value,
right?
And we'll have to get obsessive about, like, well, what's the distribution of those random items? Googling, like, hey, how do you grab a random item from an array? You're usually going to get a pretty good solution. And I suppose if you want to check it out yourself, drop both of these into like a node prompt on your from your terminal, and just run it a few times and get a general sense of, like, hey, do the first and last names ever get picked, that kind of thing. Just have a little sanity check. But usually, right, like something like this is going to work just fine.
Stack Overflow is the place to go.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, hey, I want to translate this, HTML for an email into a request or some really complicated thing, and then grabbing Stack Overflow code might not work. But hey, random array item, that's pretty basic computer science, so it should be something you can find a great example.
Yeah, so I took AP Comp Sci last semester, and they go through what is the formula for determining a random value, like you calculate the range, everything like that. So I do agree that it's something basic that you could definitely understand and learn. All right. So now that we have a random value, that's going to be our index. It's going to range from 0 to whatever the array length -1 is. So let's get the name. What is this random name that we have there? I'm going to change this to var just so we're consistent. And since we now have a result name, we can go ahead and return that result name. So now we have two complete functions. The first function does exactly what it did before, our function did before. It returns the base64 representation of a cat picture. And for this one, it returns names for the cats. And we're going to store this and return this in an array. Once we've done that, we just need to actually call these functions. And since these are very simple functions, they don't even have parameters. All they do is return things. We can go ahead and set this up so we can call this a first cat, and let's await because that was an async function. It's asynchronous, and we're going to get cat pick, and then we're just going to do it again. We're going to call for a second cat. Notice that we're not repeating the same long block of code again because we
didn't repeat ourselves. Yeah, we followed the dry principles.
Exactly.
Well,
and touching on this,
I would have folks at home, but Emily did a lot better.
And we also have abstraction here. You don't have to worry about what the function does, and it automatically, does it for you. Do you have to worry about the code and get a cat pick? No, if it works, we're all good.
Yeah. One thing to note here is that we decided to put the actual get inside that function, which makes a ton of sense because the thing I would have been worried about is make sure you're not just giving the same cat pick twice, right? So we're doing good there.
All right, awesome. Okay, now the next two things we want to call are the names. So we have a first name for one of the cats, and we can get names, and then we want a second name for our second cat, and we can call the function again. Now, everything might have been simple until now. Now is the, I guess, trickier part. We're actually returning an object from an Azure function, which if you haven't worked with JSON before, and this might be new, So let's go through that. We do have the syntax right here, so you could copy paste it. I'm going to copy paste it, but I'm going to explain what's happening in these lines. So
Okay, I know I've been diving in a lot, Emily, so feel free to tell me to be quiet.
no, go ahead. This is good.
I'll say that in general, if someone's expecting like an object back of a certain format, you probably do want to copy paste what format they're expecting.
True.
Because simple ideas like they say, hey, return an object with these things. Okay, sure. But if you're not copying the exact object, I would have returned these two cats in an array themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Like I would have had an array of two base 64 items. And so that wouldn't have been, what they were expecting, because they gave it to us like this. They want two params called cat1 and cat2. Right. So again, copying the object, and again, myself, I'll mismatch a curly brace or something. Right. So much better just copy and paste in the exact object, notation that they want, rather than trying to like just build it yourself.
I totally agree. I feel like in most cases in computer science, we're coding, copy pasting is always the way to go. Don't try to type it out.
Especially when it's request response formatting, right? Like that's the really critical one.
Yeah. So now that we have our result or response object here, let's take a look. So it's returning it in a JSON object format. Oops. And then our first field here, or this is a key, cat1. It's going to have a value of the first cat picture in base 64. Now we've already established that it's going to be first cat, and we called that right here. Same thing with cat2, very intuitive, very simple. It's going to be second cat. And then finally, we have our names array being returned. Since the formatted object already had our variable names and we named it the same thing, we don't need to change anything. It's just going to be name1 and name2. All right, I think that looks good.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to go ahead and test it out. So let's do this locally first. It's always good practice to do it locally before you try to deploy it. You don't want to keep deploying and testing, because that just sucks. Let's do func post start, and we're just going to start our function up. Awesome. So I'm going to copy this to cats. Actually, let me follow the link. So I'm going to head over to my Chrome browser and paste that in. And it might take a second because, oh, that one's pretty fast. Okay, so now we have a giant block of base 64 on our screen. Let's see if everything looks fine. So first we have our first key, which is cat1. Looks good.
Wait, let me check your LZH6 big N. Yep, looks okay to me.
All right, let's go to the next. All right, let me just control F, because this is going to take forever. Cat2. All right, we have a cat2 field, and it looks like it's base 64. Looking good. And then finally, let's go to our names. And in this case, we did end up returning, let me zoom in. We did end up returning two different names, so Daniel and Fifi, in our array. So our Azure function looks great. It does everything that our tasks want us to. So I think we're about ready to commit and get it tested by the bot. Let's deploy first, though, because you never want to forget to deploy, because then the bot will not check the updated function and you'll wonder why your code doesn't work when it actually does.
Yeah.
All right, project 2022, deploy. All right, I'm going to let that deploy and we'll be back once that's done. Okay, so now our thing has just deployed. I think we can commit it now. So this is the easy part. Git add and let's see, finish two cats. Oh, I spelled orange wrong. Okay, cool. Now that it's been committed, we can go ahead and make a pull request. So always make your pull request descriptive. And let's see, what changes do we made? We added random name generator. and added feature to return 2 pictures instead of 1. This does not close anything, and let's go ahead and create that pull request. So now the question is whether the bot likes our code. That is the real question. And let's see, all checks have passed. Wonderful. Counselor bot has approved, and it is time to merge.
I love
Magic. Okay. Well, that's it for this step. You can join us then in the next step. We're going to be talking about how to create a Morse code converter. It's going to be simple. We're going to talk about NPM packages. Yeah, see you in the next video.
Thanks, everybody.